All right. Good afternoon to everyone. We are today, we have a Zoom panel discussion sponsored by the Society for Armenian Studies, SAS, and co-sponsored by the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. The topic is a very urgent topic. The tragedy that happened in Lebanon last week has many repercussions on the Lebanese population in general. And the title is No End in Sight, Lebanon in Renewed Turmoil. We put this panel together thanks to Asbed and recommendations by Tsolin too. And this is our second or third cooperation with the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. Before introducing everyone, I would like to also announce that we're having another Zoom panel called Transition Tremors, Armenia 2 years after the Velvet Revolution, which will take place on Saturday, August 22nd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. The information is on our website, on the Facebook website, and on NAASR's website. Again, this is a co-sponsored by the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues. I would also like to thank Mark Mamigonian, Sara Ignatius, and Laura Yardumian for their help of putting together today's panel. We have a distinguished panelist today from different parts of the world. We're going to discuss various aspects of Lebanese history, politics, and culture, specifically touching on the recent events. We have today Professor Ohaness Geukjian, Assistant Professor of Political Studies and Conflict Resolution at the American University of Beirut. He has published 3 books and numerous scholarly articles in journals including Middle Eastern Studies, Nationalities Papers, Middle East Journal, and the Maghreb Review. His forthcoming book on Russian intervention in Syria will be published by McGill University Press. Congratulations. Our second speaker is Professor Tsolin Nalbantian, who is an associate professor of modern Middle East history at Leiden University. She's a historian working on the social and cultural history of the Middle East. Nalbantian is co-series editor of Critical Connected Histories and has published articles in Mashreq and Maghreb, Mesa Review of Middle East Studies, and History Compass. Our third speaker is Professor Antranig Dakessian, who is an associate professor in the Department of Armenian Studies at the Haigazian University. He is also executive secretary of the Haigazian Armenological Review. Dakessian has conducted research on diverse aspects of the Lebanese-Armenian community, particularly on its economic and cultural output. Our fourth speaker is attorney Sara Anjargolian, who is the head of the Office of the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs of the Republic of Armenia and also a lawyer and multimedia journalist. She's the co-founder and board member of Impact Hub Yerevan. Born in London, raised and educated in the US, she currently lives and works in Armenia. Last but not least, the moderator of today's panel is Professor Asbed Kotchikian, who is a senior lecturer of the Global Studies at Bentley University. His research interests include foreign policies of small and weak states, questions of identity and diasporas, and regional and developments in the Middle East and Eurasia. In recent years, he has conducted field research on minorities in the Middle East, the most recent being in Syria last year. So the floor is yours, moderator, Professor Kotchikian.
Thank you, Bedros, and welcome everyone. I would like to just echo quickly my thanks, my gratitude to SAS for helping organize this and supporting this, as well as NAASR and everyone who is out here to listen to us. And definitely thank you for the panelists for being willing to participate in such a short notice in our discussions, as Bedros mentioned, on this timely issue. A couple of quick comments about the process as well as the topics. First of all, about the topic, the main concern about this conversation today, this panel today, is to not only talk about the Armenians in Lebanon, but to situate Armenians in the larger fabric of the Lebanese political processes. It's not just about the explosion that occurred, that devastated Beirut, but it is also about issues in general that existed before and persist after the explosion. We're probably not going to explore in too much depth everything. We cannot do that in the limited time that we have, but the goal is to provide some educated, some informed concepts to contextualize things. According to Lebanese folklore, Beirut has been destroyed and reborn and rebuilt 7 times in its history. So they always talk about the phoenix-like nature of Beirut. One of the questions that has been in my mind in the last 2 weeks has also been, can the phoenix be reborn? Can the phoenix rise again? So hopefully we can address some of those issues. Most of you here, one way or another, have family, have people you know who have suffered from this explosion. So our sympathy goes to everyone. And from that perspective, I just want to mention that we are going to have, the panelists are going to each have about 5 to 6 minutes of presentation, basic themes and basic ideas about their topics, respective topics. Then we will have a discussion, if need be, and additions within the panel, and we're going to open the floor for questions from the public. It would be helpful if you have any specific question, to address it to the specific panelist as well. So that being said, I would like to ask Ohaness, Professor Geukjian, to start with his presentation. He will be contextualizing the Lebanese political system, or what's happening in Lebanon, in the larger Lebanese political, socioeconomic political system. The floor is yours, Ohaness. Make sure that you unmute yourself.
All right. Thank you very much for all of you, particularly all those who organized this panel, timely panel, about the events happening in Lebanon, particularly, and the Middle East in general. The Armenians being part of Lebanon, certainly. So when we talk about Lebanon, certainly we are talking also about the Lebanese-Armenians. Now, in 5 to 6 minutes, as Asbed said, I will pinpoint key issues associated with the Lebanese political system without going into details. Now, the gridlock, before talking about the gridlock, I would like to emphasize that the Lebanese system is a consociational power-sharing political system. Usually, it has faced gridlock and has been in decision-making, and this has been a characteristic of the Lebanese system since independence 1943. It is also important to emphasize that the ministerial positions since 1943 actually went to politicians who belong to particular sects, and this continued to be the case after the Civil War, when it ended in 1990, 89-90 with the Ta'if agreement, which was also power-sharing arrangements. And as usual, the politicians participating in the governments, so-called national unity governments that have been failures actually, in those governments, they shared the spoils of the system. Rather than agreeing on common policy issues concerning society, economy, and people in general, national unity governments have provided the fertile ground for those politicians to continue to carry their quarrels inside the government and continue their quarrels inside the governments. So this has led to gridlock in no decision making, and actually, in addition to that, the Lebanese political system has been characterized by nepotism, clientelism, corruption, actually chronic corruption, particularly after the 1990, when politicians used to buy loyalties and make sure that their constituencies will vote to them in the general elections. So ignoring the economic issues, society issues, security, safety, it was important that these politicians should have kept Lebanon away from the power struggle in the Middle East, so that the system remains stable and internal peace and stability prevail. However, the opposite actually happened. Rather than isolating or protecting as far as possible the power sharing system against the power struggle in the Middle East, Lebanese parties took Lebanon into those power struggles. Actually, those politicians were clients, they had patrons, and the external factor in Lebanese politics cannot be ignored. And the Lebanese politics and socio-economic and political instability cannot be analyzed without referring and examining the external factor, those regional powers who intervened in Lebanon. Therefore, democracy in Lebanon became flawed by nepotism. There was already crony capitalism and crony deals made by the politicians, as I said a while ago, who shared the spoils of the system. This actually led to catastrophic results: poverty, inequality, lack of economic development. Reconstruction was only based in Beirut. The suburbs were left underdeveloped and poverty increased. In a recent statistics that was published 2 days ago, just to give you an example, the poverty rate that was 28% in 2019, it became 55% as of May 2020. The popular uprising on the 17th October actually exposed the economic and political bankruptcy of Lebanon, and we can go to the details after a while, and the impact of that on the Armenian community too, as the panel goes on and continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ohaness. Very brief, simple, but definitely not simplistic. We can talk days and weeks about the sectarian system in Lebanon. And one of the things to keep in mind is because of this situation, Lebanon hardly developed institutions, state institutions, to be able to become a viable state. And people pledge their allegiance to their sect and party first, and then to the state. Moving on, I would like to ask Tsolin to basically situate the Armenian community in this larger context that Ohannes just painted for us. Tsolin, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Asbed, for doing the organizing, and also thank you, NAASR and SAS for the sponsorship and putting this together. And to my co-panelists, thank you for coming on. So I'm going to speak very briefly as well, and I will talk a little bit about it from an Armenian, a quote-unquote Armenian perspective. So traditional academic scholarship and community representations of Armenians often follow a similar line. So the line goes historically that Armenians are newer inhabitants, so to speak, of Lebanon, that most, but not all, arrived as refugees during and after the Armenian genocide. And often this line of thinking presents Armenians either as temporary or guests or or as non-native to Lebanon. And the corollary of this, of course, is that they must belong somewhere else, right? So this line of thinking is often stirred. It's brought up in particular moments of crisis and tension, domestically and globally, from Armenians themselves and also from non-Armenians. Now, the thing is, elements of what I just described are certainly true, right? The presence of Armenians mostly is dated to the early 20th century. But this is what I want to stress in the time remaining, is that that does not make them outside of the sectarian political structure. And it does not embed their political elites any less to that sectarian infrastructure, right? They're completely embedded within the sectarian infrastructure. And I would say that some of their institutions have been forced into the sectarian system, right? I don't think that Armenians had the choice to join the sectarian system or not. But at the same time, their activities, their everyday, daily activities reinforce the concept of sectarianism. They emanate sectarianism. So in fact, actually Armenian institutions and organizations have gained power through the sectarian institution, through the sectarian infrastructure. And I say this because there's no Armenian, and this is sort of echoing what Asbed said in the beginning of before he even introduced us. I say this because there's no Armenian exceptionalism in this situation. And I say this vis-a-vis sectarianism and vis-a-vis the popular uprisings that have occurred in October, but also from before, and also vis-a-vis this current catastrophe. I will say that there is an added factor that's also not necessarily exceptional to Armenians, but there is sort of a little glitch in that some who can afford it have procured Armenian nationality, right? And this could spark a wave to emigrate. Maybe this is something we can talk about in the Q&A and in the discussion. But again, even in the feeling of wanting to emigrate, that's not exceptional, right? Because other Armenians too, if they could afford it class-wise, would certainly attempt to leave. And I can, there's anything from Facebook forums that have sort of sprung up trying to help Lebanese leave Lebanon, to even my own inbox being by queries of, say, students or of colleagues trying to leave Lebanon. So, but again, this is not necessarily at all exceptional. And then maybe during the time remaining in the Q&A and in our discussion, we can talk about specific examples of how Armenians have gained power through the sectarian system. But I think I'll leave it there just to give us sort of a springboard to talk, and we can move on and then hopefully come back.
Thank you, Tsolin. You still have about 2 minutes if you want to talk about other things, but
I'd rather leave it so we can come together. Yeah, okay. It's better.
Okay, good. Very insightful. I think that exceptionalism or the lack of exceptionalism is something to keep in mind, and the fact that the Armenian community became adapted to the existing fabric and the institutions is something to keep in mind, rather than bringing anything new to the system. They rather became players in the existing system. Leaving at that, I would like to go to Antranig now to provide us with some insights from within, as someone who who teaches at the only Armenian university outside of the Armenia, at Haigazian University, and his interactions with the Armenian community and students and so on, to give us a sort of an insider view of not only the overall discussion, but also especially after what happened, the recent developments, political and catastrophic as well.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. Hi to everybody. My introduction will have two parts. Part one will identify certain features of the Lebanese-Armenian community, certain key moments that punctuate its history. Part two will try to give a broad analysis of some aspects of the current state of things. I start with certain features of the community. One, the modern history of the community coincides with the proclamation of the State of Lebanon in 1920. The Lausanne Treaty granted the Armenian refugees Lebanese citizenships, security, and political integration. Lebanese consociational system empowered the Armenian Church to organize the refugees into a community. In the early 1970s, the community had reached to more than 200,000 from a mere 32,000 in 1932. This was due to natural growth and continuous inflows from unstable neighboring countries. The community became the most densely populated community in the diaspora. Two, the cultural autonomy afforded by Lebanon's consociational system enabled the community to undergo an internal integration and generate the most prosperous and affluent culture in the diaspora that gradually produced a unique Lebanese-Armenian identity. This in turn influenced the shaping of variegated diaspora Armenian community identities. 3. By the mid-70s, the third generation had transformed itself into an influential community with a prosperous socio-economic and extensive cultural space. Its autarky and pseudo-state, if I may, like all the other communities of Lebanon, expanded beyond the Armenian residential areas of Burj Hamoud, Hajan Khalil Badawi, Hayashen, the peripheries, and the Beirut commercial centers, and was making inroads to the political space and reclaiming its communal rights. 4. With the founding of Haigazian College, currently Haigazian University, the community registered the highest institutional achievement in education in the Armenian diaspora globally. To this day, Haigazian remains the only Armenian university in the diaspora. Haigazian became the flashpoint for compromises among the younger generation. Besides, the 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide and the reintroduction of Soviet Armenia helped the community to downgrade its differences and ushered in an unprecedented inter-party collaboration, which led to the community out of the Lebanese civil war with the least losses. 5. However, migration due to the war took a heavy toll. By the early 1990s, the community had diminished both in capacity and power. Now I come to part 2, namely analyzing some aspects of the current community. From the early 1990s, the Lebanese-Armenian community entered a new phase. We may call it phase 2 of its modern history. This phase was formulated on a number of contexts, including the domestic, regional, international, Arab, and Armenian context, and across a variety of levels, including the political, economic, and sociological. These factors had initiated processes of core change, which put the whole world in a political, socio-economic, cultural, environmental, global transition. At the local Lebanese level, with the new dawn of post-Civil War Lebanon, the Armenian community was introduced to an already globalizing and changing environment. Both Lebanon and the community had to reposition themselves on the corresponding maps. The community struggled to reshape itself and adapt to the reformed Lebanese state system, which itself was in a process of transformation. Besides, the community had to reboot its relations with the local Lebanese diverse communities and situate itself within the Lebanese sectarian consociational setup, specifically the Taif agreement. At the diasporic level, the community struggled to adapt itself to a new diaspora where the geographical, demographic, socioeconomic, and cultural realities and balances had shifted and drastically changed. Within the context of the Armenia, the community had to reposition itself vis-a-vis the independent state of Armenia and the Nagorno-Karabakh war of self-determination. And perhaps, most importantly, within itself, the community, less monolithic and more diversified than ever, had to take courageous steps to reformulate and modernize itself, adequately address the quests of its fourth and forthcoming generations, and keep them on its monitoring screen. I leave it to you to come to your own conclusions on the extent to which these progressive and courageous steps were taken. One last thing, the community struggled against these unstable and shaky realities while it itself was mostly exhausted, consumed, and very weak in every sense of the word. In a nutshell, as of the 90s, the community is struggling to adapt to the continuous instability of the region and the reduction of its role in the wider Armenian diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antranig. One thing that, for those who don't know, in terms of about the Lebanese system, is that Lebanon, the last time Lebanon had a census was in 1932. Since then, no one is willing to find out what are the numbers of each community. And they're all based on extrapolations and various other tools. One method that I have used in my research in Syria recently and in Lebanon in terms of trying to find the number of the community was to extrapolate it from the number of students in Armenian schools, which is flawed, obviously, but it's a major task. So For political purposes, some people can use higher numbers, as always do, but a real scientifically conducted survey or census is hard to come by in Lebanon. Now, this was a great segue, Antranig, for talking about the regional changes and so on. And you also mentioned about the Armenia factor. Immediately after the explosion, the international community got together to develop or provide aid to Lebanon, spearheaded by France. The international community pledged 250 million euros. But Armenia, as a country which is closely tied with Lebanon, not just because of the community, but also for various reasons, and going through hardship itself, especially when it comes to medical, public health, and so on and so forth, within days managed to send in aid and provide support to not only Armenians, but also to Lebanon. A very wise move. So for that and for some more details and some thoughts, I would like to ask Sara to share her opinion and her thoughts.
Thanks so much, Asbed. Thank you, NAASR and SAS for organizing. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm not the historian, one of the historians in the group, so I will talk to you generally about what we have done, the government of Armenia has done in the last week or 10 days or so since the explosion. So the explosion happened on August 4th, and on August 8th, so 4 days later, I accompanied the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs, as well as a member of parliament and Chief of Staff to the Deputy Prime Minister, as well as the head of the Armenia Fund on the first humanitarian flight to Beirut. So there was 3 humanitarian flights that went. Basically, the same plane went and came back 3 times. And the first one was the one that we went on. The delegation, the purpose of the trip was not only to deliver the humanitarian aid, but also to assess the situation vis-a-vis our Lebanese-Armenian compatriots. So of the 3 flights, I'd like to clarify that 2 of the 3 flights was a government-to-government aid. In other words, it was from the Republic of Armenia government to the Lebanese government, whereas 1 flight was delivered to the Lebanese-Armenian community. I will say that literally the next day after the explosion, I quickly called the Deputy Minister of Health and asked if we could assemble a group of physicians and nurses to immediately deploy to Beirut. And even in this very difficult COVID situation, within a few hours, we had assembled about 25 healthcare professionals that were ready to go to Beirut. However, the Lebanese government actually told us that it was better to send medical supplies, different kinds of pharmaceutical equipment, more than they needed physicians and nurses. So that was definitely explored. However, we obviously chose to wait and receive the list from the Lebanese government and send humanitarian aid based on the need. In terms of medical supplies, what was on those 3 flights? Mostly it was medicine supplies, as well as non-perishable food. The aid to the community was handed over to the Lebanese primacy of the Apostolic Church. And in terms of after the aid was handed over, basically the next 3 days, myself, the High Commissioner, the head of Armenia Fund, our delegation proceeded to spend time with the Armenian community on the ground. We met with all of the spiritual leaders, we met with all of the political leaders, and we met with a group of journalists representing all of the diaspora media outlets. We met with community-based organizations, people serving not only the Armenian community, but the Lebanese community. We met social workers who have one-on-one conversations. And perhaps most jarring was that we had the opportunity to visit the homes of Lebanese-Armenians whose homes were completely destroyed. So that's what we experienced over the 3 days. In terms of and of course also had the opportunity to visit Haigazian, which was absolutely a highlight. in terms of the role of the Republic of Armenia in this situation, I would say it's twofold. First and foremost, it's to rebuild, to be a partner in rebuilding what has been devastated in terms of our community, our schools, our community centers, our churches. I understand that an extensive needs assessment is happening in terms of the actual financial cost of everything that needs to be reconstructed. Armenia Fund, I'm thrilled that Armenia Fund very quickly created a fund that was specifically for rebuilding our community organizations and institutions in Lebanon. That's the first role. The second role is to create a home for those Armenians who have decided to leave Lebanon and come to Armenia. And so since we came back from our delegation, we returned on the 12th. We have been creating, basically speaking to all parts of the government to understand what is the extent to what is our offering as a government to those Lebanese-Armenians who would like to move to Armenia. So that's what we've been working on since we returned. In terms of some numbers, since flights started to fly from Beirut to Yerevan, this is before the explosion, after basically our COVID-related rules were lightened a little bit. Flights started to fly in July. And in the 5 or now 6 actually commercial flights that came in, Middle Eastern Airlines as well as Armenia Air, I have my 1-minute warning. I would say approximately 600 people have come on those flights from Beirut to Armenia. I'll leave it there. Asbed, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sara. One thing to be mentioned is that some of you might have seen this. There has been a chaotic situation in Beirut airport yesterday where a lot of Lebanese were trying to get out of the country on the first available flights. So again, going back to what Tsolin said, contextualizing the need for the Armenians to leave is not unique to the Armenians, but also to the rest of the Lebanese. According to some facts, that after the explosion, one of the travel agencies I communicated with in terms of getting some information, within half an hour of setting up a flight from Beirut to Yerevan, within half an hour, all the tickets were sold out. So that's how eager people are to leave. And before asking more discussion among the panelists, one of the things to have also keep in mind is that since the explosion, the number of COVID-19 cases have soared in Lebanon up to 300. And the most recent I had was August 11th, 300 cases per day, whereas the highest that they had was in May. They had about 65 or so cases per day. So you have that. And just to contextualize one final thing, the currency devaluation in Lebanon has been 85%. Inflation is at 55%. Poverty rate is at 35%. Poverty is at 45%. Unemployment is at 35%. And according to some initial estimates, just the physical damage that Beirut and its suburbs suffered is capped at 15 billion. This is just the physical destruction. We're talking about roughly 200 people died of this, and about 6,000 to 7,000 people have been injured. 300,000 people are left without homes or damaged homes. So now, that being said, I do want to ask, I would like to give the opportunity to the panelists themselves, if you have anything that you want to add based on what your co-panelists said, to just add a couple of things in 2 minutes, extra 2 minutes. So I'll go in order. If Ohaness, you have anything to add or any comment?
Yeah, I would like, although I have been following what's happening within the community, the efforts that actually have been done by the representatives of community organizations, the representatives of the political parties. Probably Antranig is much more involved in those things. Although I am following, and reading about the steps. A body has been already established in order to respond as far as possible and provide aid and probably financial assistance. If Antranig is much more involved in this, although I'm following, as I said, probably Antranig would like to give us more details about what type of aid is being provided to all those families whose homes are completely destroyed or partly damaged, and many people are left homeless. I'm talking about the Armenians. In the Armenian quarters of Beirut, Hajan, Khalil Badawi, Ashrafiya, Madawar, and even in the Matan, Burchamut.
Antranig, you want to answer that, and that you can also comment on whatever else you want to do, because Ohaness directly asked you, so you make sure you unmute yourself. Thank you.
Asbed, I don't know, but maybe if there are other questions, I'll combine the questions addressed to me, and I'll ask, respond positive about them.
This is within the panel, Antranig. This is within the panel.
Okay,
I will combine the questions later.
Okay, so in that case, I can say that there are several groups, bodies in the Lebanon, Armenian groups, who are trying to be helpful. Even though there is a sort of a centralized group headed by Catholics Aram I, but there are other groups as well, and there are different announcements coming from different parties, coming from different organizations, unions, philanthropic organizations. So I can't, even though it is supposed to be a centralized relief effort, but within that centralized relief effort, and even participants of groups who are participants in that relief group, body, they have their own separate relief efforts. As for the, generally speaking about what are they doing generally, there are different sorts of relief efforts. There is the kitchen soup idea already being performed. Renovation is being done in the sense that different groups, different representatives of different groupings are coming to houses and checking the house, writing down, registering whatever is needed, and soon they have already started to do the renovation. In other cases, the houses which cannot be, you cannot live in them, families who are left homeless, they will be given houses as well, homes, for a while, and then their houses will be renovated. There is, of course, again, the psychological effort, which is done in the sense that counseling. So many people need counseling, and that's already in the process. So I think these are the basic things which are done. Myself, I would prefer to have all these under one umbrella, which is not the case, but at least I will be expecting that transparency and full accountability of whatever happened, whatever effort was conducted and realized, materialized, I think should be publicized.
Okay, thank you, Antranig. Tsolin, do you have any thoughts, or listening to the other panelists in terms of what you said earlier?
Thank you. Yeah, I just maybe 2 points. I wonder how centralized relief efforts can be if they are aimed towards just Armenians. And I say that because you're gearing relief efforts specifically to Armenians with regards to their homes being lost, but their neighbors may not be Armenian. So in the same building, if they have lost their apartment, do they get help from a relief organization that's actually centered by a sectarian one if it's done through the prelacy? And then the neighbor does not. So that's sort of curious, something that we need to talk about again, right? Because that is then we are participating in that sectarian structure even from the outside, right? And then the other thing I wanted to talk about just very quickly in a sentence or two is about, Asbed had mentioned the lack of the state. in one of your comments. I want to draw the attention to the fact that the state is pretty strong, because when there were demonstrations against people with regards to even this latest catastrophe, the state came out quite strongly and was able to not only suppress the demonstrations, but we're actually using live ammunitions against these mourning protesters. So the state can't be that weak.
I said state institutions, not necessarily the state.
But even the state, those are state institutions. The military and the police apparatus are state institutions. So we have to be careful by always saying, oh, Lebanon is a failed state. If Lebanon is such a failed state, they couldn't then attack its own people. So who is it a failed state to, right? Who is it a state for? Right? I think that that's something also we need to, discuss as well. If we're broadening this issue, which I think it's our responsibility to do, to talk about, non-Armenian issues as well. Right. So those are my sort of two comments for now, at least.
Okay. Thank you, Tsolin. Although one thing I have to ask as a political scientist and as something I teach, Lebanon is a classic case of a failed state that all different indicators show.
Not as a historian.
Ohaness, you want to comment on something? If not, just one thing, by the way, before you go on, for all the listeners or the audience, if you can refrain from typing into the chat, rather ask your questions in the Q&A, and try to not overwhelm us with the questions now. I mean, if you can hold on to it a bit so that I can get to them individually. Yes, Ohaness, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with you. I would disagree with Tsolin here. State institutions are collapsed. Yes, the army is still holding, but that's not an indication to say that the strong state is there. The state is a failed state. Just to give you proof, the state has been unable to provide the public goods, including electricity, water, collecting the garbage from the streets. Complete collapse of state institutions and capacity. Another evidence, just to provide, and always from a political science perspective, most of the aid that has been delivered by the donors, by the foreign donors to Lebanon, have been delivered to civil society organizations, NGOs, and not to state institutions, because those institutions have been not capable of and corrupt, and not able to distribute those aid fairly and equally. So this is a strong evidence of failed state. All the Lebanese, without exception, irrespective of their sectarian and the religious belonging, there is most of the Lebanese, I don't have statistics in front of me, but most of the Lebanese have lost hope and had lost their hope and in their state and in their institutions, because those institutions have been unable to provide the public goods for years, not only after the explosion, but for years. And just to mention an example, electricity is enough. Is an example that I think it speaks by itself. In Lebanon, we don't have electricity, dear colleagues. We don't have clean water to drink. The garbage is in the streets, piles of garbage in the street, the trash, unable to collect the trash, infrastructure broken. All the Lebanese, not to talk about the fiscal policy and the huge foreign debt, over 100 billion, and inability of Lebanon to pay its public debt. So what else we could provide in order to say that the state is a failed state? For sure, the state is a failed state. And one final comment, Asbed, if you allow, this system needs very clear and categoric structural reform. Otherwise, nothing will be fixed in Lebanon. Thank you very much.
Right. Tsolin, as you can see, there is an interdisciplinary sort of clash of ideas, historians, sociologists, anthropologists versus a political scientist. So this is what I was looking forward actually to have a discussion, looking at the issues from different perspectives. Sara, before going on to you. One of the things is, and I almost forgot, the opportunity that this disaster might have provided, and I have talked with this about this in different places, that this is a perfect opportunity to reset. Reset meaning, as Ohannes mentioned, reset structurally and so on and so forth. But we have to also understand that might be wishful thinking rather than having a real structural change. And one example I have been thinking a lot recently, it was Haiti 10 years ago exactly, went through a tsunami and a major earthquake. International community pledged $20 billion. And 10 years later, the corrupt government there, and cronyism and so on and so forth, basically has rendered the opportunity to reset the country quite difficult. So Sara, I would like to come to you now, based on what you've been listening to us talking about this. You have any thoughts or any ideas about or anything to add?
Obviously, Asbed, I'm looking at this discussion from the lens of Armenia and from the lens of what we've been working on here. Look, the conversation about Lebanon was happening inside of the government before the explosion, mostly because of the, I would say hundreds of Lebanese Armenians who had been writing to our office as well as our partner organizations asking what kinds of opportunities they could access in Armenia. The explosion fast-tracked that, and now rather than receiving hundreds, we're up to over 1,000 inquiries between our emails and Facebooks and phone calls, etc. Not to mention, I will say, the people who were simply coming up to us in the streets. It was since the word had gotten out that there was a delegation from the Republic of Armenia. Almost all Armenians would come up to us and ask us, what are the opportunities? So, it's hard for me to comment vis-a-vis the more historical context. I'm certainly not an expert, on Lebanon in that sense. But I will say that I think we feel a little bit stuck between a rock and a hard place. In what sense? Because on the one hand, it's extremely important to preserve our Lebanese-Armenian community in Beirut, our institutions, which have been there, for decades. On the other hand, we need to have a very serious hand extended to our compatriots who would like to resettle in Armenia. And it will be an absolute lost opportunity if our Lebanese-Armenian compatriots decide to leave and go to, other shores and not settle in the Republic of Armenia. That will absolutely be our failure. So this is what the discussions that are happening. This is what we're talking about. And so those are the thoughts going through my mind as I'm listening to my colleagues.
No, absolutely, right on spot, Sara. I think you also preempted one of the questions about to what extent are relief efforts coordinated between the Lebanese Armenian community and the Lebanese government, in a sense that, one thing I have to comment is that when you talk about diaspora Armenian relations, you have a government in Armenia that represents. You might not like it, or you might like it, but it represents a country. But in the absence of an organized or an entity that can speak on behalf of the Armenians, it's impossible to say that on behalf of the diaspora. And you cannot say that this people speak on behalf of the community. But as Antranig mentioned, there is a relief body, Lebanese Armenian reconstruction body. So, Sara, do you have anything to add about direct contact with the Lebanese? What relief efforts have you been doing? And also follow up on that, are there Armenians who are moving to Armenia, Lebanese Armenians moving to Armenia? Are they people who already have a foothold, meaning relatives, or they're just, if you have any statistics or any, any insight?
So I didn't understand the first question. Let me take the second one. The first Middle Eastern Airlines flight that started to fly after the COVID restrictions were lightened was on July 14. And so on July 14, what our office did was send a group of 5-6 people from our office to actually try to assess on the ground the needs of people coming from Beirut. Thankfully, what we were able to do since July 14 is hand out an actual 2-page questionnaire on the flight. As people are, we coordinated with Middle Eastern Airlines, with Armenian Air, as well as with our aviation committee, that as people are about to land, besides the COVID paperwork they fill out, they also, people coming from Beirut, fill out their information. How many people are they coming with? They click the box if they're planning on staying a short amount of time, a long amount of time, etc. I will say that these flights, until the one that arrived yesterday, including the one that arrived yesterday, most people, or almost all people, had either someone waiting for them at the airport. They seem to already have homes here.
You mean relative, like a
a
personally waiting, or a representative from government?
No. Well, the representative of government was our office, the 5 to 6 people standing there, handing out flyers, welcoming people, making sure they know who to call if they have any issues. But my point is that it felt like, and it seemed like, and from our review of the paperwork we've received, most of the people who have come on these flights have support here in Armenia, whether they already have homes or they have relatives with homes, etc. Obviously, until recently, it was only Republic of Armenia citizens and residents who could come. So there was also that, you know, the statistic that we have learned from our counterparts at the embassy in Lebanon, Armenian embassy in Lebanon, is that approximately 20,000 or so Lebanese have Republic of Armenia citizenship. So a lot of people already, you know, are dual citizens and are coming in with their citizenship. So this is the feeling we're getting, and the statistics that we have right now.
Earlier to Tsolin's questions, rhetorical question, but it was also a good question, the question about helping non-Armenians in terms of assisting and so on. One of the members of the audience mentioned that the GBU Relief Fund organizer in Lebanon said that the rebuilding committee, while visiting Armenians' homes, if there were non-Armenians living in the buildings where Armenians reside, they are also measuring and evaluating those collapsed homes too, to make sure that they're helping you know, the non-Armenians as well. So at least there is some thought. I'm not going to call it strategic thinking. This is beyond strategic. It's, I think, humanitarian thinking. Before going on to other questions, I would like to ask audience to if they have any questions to Antranig Dakessian, because his time is limited with us. If you have any questions to him specifically, go ahead and ask it. So any questions or anyone from the panel looking at this issue, or any questions or comments to Antranig? One of the questions was that probably Sara I asked at the beginning. It was basically, how is it being coordinated? Relief is being coordinated between the Lebanese-Armenian community and the Republic of Armenia, or is there a coordination?
Asbed, maybe Sara could talk more about the coordination between the relief efforts of the Lebanese-Armenians and the Armenian state. But I have a couple of points I want to raise due to the questions you had already raised. One of them is the reset of the system, what you talked about, and it needs to be reset. The system needs to be reset. I think a very wonderful opportunity was back in 1990, right after the Civil War ended.
Antranig, you got muted.
Okay. The point is that there was an opportunity to reset the system in 1990. They didn't. They just fine-tuned it. Now it's not about a fine-tuning. You have to change the system, and the system, I mean, the consociational system should go. Okay, this is all I have to say regarding the system. Now, regarding the centralization of the relief efforts and what have you, in that sense, I have to say the following. There is a need of centralization, because several different Armenian organizations are checking those who were damaged. And these people could get relief from different places. The next question I have in mind is whether this Armenian relief effort was coordinated with the Lebanese state. What I have to say in this regard is that the Lebanese state relief efforts are not coordinated. You have the army separately, okay, and you have the body of the state relief effort. Two different institutions, sort of, okay, and they are not coordinating with each other. So we have a problem. We have a disorganized state and disorganized Armenian community. So I don't expect to have the relief efforts to be coordinated. I don't see that.
Okay. Sarah, before I pass on. Oh, go ahead, Antranig. Sorry, I interrupted. You have one more.
I just want to say that thank you for this opportunity. I have to leave if you don't mind. Thank you for
not
this
at all. Thank you, Antranig. Thank you for your time.
Take care. Bye.
And stay safe and sane. Sara, coming back to you, this seems to be one of the other issues that has been raised, and Ohaness mentioned it as well, that most of the aid coming to Lebanon is being distributed to grassroots, for the lack of any other word, civil society groups, right? And one of the things I have to mention that I have been amazed to see people-to-people aid in Lebanon rather than government. You know, people as far away as from Tripoli and other areas coming in for the relief work. Now, the question is, in your meetings or in your plan of action as the Office of High Commissioner of Armenia or Diaspora, have you thought or have you explored opportunities to work with so-called this is one of the questions that we have, so-called grassroots organizations within the Armenian community or within other Lebanese groups, actually? And does the political and religious leadership of the community would be considered as part of these? So in other words, how are you envisioning the aid?
Look, in terms of the 3 aircraft that went from the Republic of Armenia to Lebanon, 2 of those 3, as I mentioned, was government to government. It was the Republic of Armenia to the Lebanese government, and that was it was incredibly important that we handled it that way. The third one, or actually the second of the 3, went to the Armenian community, and that was mostly foodstuff. However, since our return to Armenia, we have also been coordinating, receiving, organizing all kinds of diaspora Armenians, not only organizations, but individuals who are interested in doing something in Lebanon. Since we returned and already, delivered the government to government part of this aid, now we have been able to basically be in the role of a connector, right? Try to connect the people who are interested in delivering that aid with more on the ground organizations. Obviously, considering the fact that there are so many different spiritual leaderships as well as political leaderships in Lebanon, we need to be as neutral as we can, right, in terms of, where we refer that aid to. So we truly are doing our best to try to be as I'm thinking in Armenian, as balanced as we can, and keeping those conversations, open lines of conversation in terms of doing that. But I mean, in terms of, are we coordinating the aid, from the Lebanese government to that would absolutely be inappropriate. That's not our role, to be coordinating the aid from the government to the people, etc.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Sara. I mean, this is one of the biggest issues, right? In terms of state-to-state relations, you always have to respect the sovereignty of the state that you're dealing with. Ohaness, I will give you an opportunity in a second, but I wanted to go back to Tsolin quickly in terms of your take, in terms of the discussion on this about aid from Armenia to the Armenians in Lebanon. And you raised a very good question earlier, which one of the audience members responded. How do you envision or think out loud about this whole aid and reconstruction and resetting, if you want to call the political system? How does that Armenians would fit, in your opinion, in the larger Lebanese context?
Well, thank you. I mean, the question about the aid only going to Armenians, it's not because I'm concerned with exacerbating confessional tensions. The tensions already exist in Lebanon, but I think what I'm concerned with is all of the people who are donating money would be also sectarian, like sectarian arms themselves, right? By being part of that structure. And I don't know how comfortable people would feel about that if they think about it, actually, because you're sort of upholding that structure. And of course, I'm all for the overhaul of the system. But I want to sort of say that if you believe in overhauling the system, that would ipso facto mean that these Armenian institutions that have a lot of power within the community would automatically be reduced in power. And how comfortable would that make people? It doesn't make me feel uncomfortable, right? Because I believe in the overhaul of the system. But if you are concerned, with maintaining the political and religious, if you're concerned with having your Armenian political figures and your Armenian religious institutions be as important as they are vis-a-vis the Lebanese government or the Lebanese sectarian system, are you okay with them losing that type of power? I don't think they're okay with it, right? Just like every other sectarian leader is not going to be pro overhauling the system because they live off that system. Same thing with Armenian political institutions and Armenian religious institutions. And I think we need to talk about that we are embedded into that structure. And if you're okay with overhauling the system where it should be overhauled, right? Sectarianism is obviously a poison. That you have to also be okay with that system, right? So you would want a census. Armenians also don't want a census. They're not pro-census, right?
Right. No one is.
Right. No, some people are, right? Some populations are actually, right? But not Armenians. And do you want possibly less Armenian figures in government, right? The position of the Catholicos would really change because he really enjoys a very particular position in Lebanon, right? He's the Catholicos of Armenians vis-a-vis, the Armenian church institutions, but he's also a political figure vis-a-vis the Lebanese state. Do you want that to be questioned? Do you want that to be loosened? I would be all for it, but history has also showed that these figures don't like to be pushed out of these positions of power, right? Even if they are minor in power, in comparison to that's their power, right? So we also have to talk about that seriously as well, if you want to talk about that.
Right. No, very, very good point. And this also raises the issue of aid being collected, fundraisers, and so on and so forth. You cannot, unless it's an international organization, right? Like the Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, and so on and so forth. Most of the other fundraisers that are happening are very targeted. And this is a brave new world of fundraising going on, right? You can manage to have very specific. I've seen people saying, specifically this neighborhood, like within a neighborhood, specifically raising money, non-Armenians, and so on and so forth. So very interesting comment, Tsolin, and contextualizing as always. Ohannes, sorry, I will. The floor is yours. You wanted to intervene earlier.
Yes, if you allow, I would like to add a few more things on what Antranig and Tsolin said. So let me start to continue what Tsolin said.
2 minutes, please,
Yes,
Ohannes.
yes, 2 minutes. 1 minute for Tsolin and 1 other minute for Sara and Antranig. Overhauling the system, there's an interesting discussion that has started in Lebanon, particularly after the explosion, that the civic state should be built. We should acknowledge that building the state has been incomplete in Lebanon. Now, one thing to complete what Tsolin said, overhauling the system, I mean, this is not easy, but if the Taif agreement is implemented, they didn't implement it. If a Senate, for example, was created, then the sects would have been represented in the Senate, and the lower house of parliament would have become less sectarian. So this is very important issue that we should take into consideration. Probably it is part of the overhauling the system, starting with the forms and the implementation of the provisions of the Taif agreement. So let's see what would happen, so that the sectarianism eases a little bit in Lebanon, and the lower house of parliament becomes less sectarian with a new electoral law, if made, certainly. This partly also addresses Antranig's concern that consociationism should go, the system. Now, I don't think consociationism actually disappears in Lebanon, because although I have many actually criticisms of the consociational system, and yes, and this is not actually, there is no time to raise it here, but reform is important aspect. Concerning Sara's actually comments and information that she provided, yes, the coordination is difficult, and it is also difficult. I mean, the issue of how many Armenians would like to return to Armenia. Also, we should take into consideration that while repatriating some Armenians to Armenia, we should not weaken the diaspora, because a strong Armenia also needs a strong diaspora. So these are critical issues. I think Sara is much more involved in the discussions. You raised a very important point, what the government of Armenia is thinking about all this. I leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ohaness. And this is two comments on what you said. A confessional system or sectarian system doesn't necessarily mean it's inoperable or it's not non-operational. One interesting fact is that up until the Lebanese Civil War in 1975, the Lebanese model was actually being examined to apply it in several multi-ethnic, multi-confessional systems, including Northern Ireland. As they were discussing it, obviously the whole system broke down, and it said, never mind. People said, never mind. But to the point, very, very, very much to the point. And also to keep in mind is one has to also consider that any group, especially in the Lebanese system, confessional groups and so on, would not be happy to see their people leave. I'm not just talking about Armenians, but also others, because at the end of the day, they will, by diminishing, by sort of an attrition of people, steady flow of people, their power base also weakens. So this plays into the internal political structure in Lebanon. Sara, someone has asked specifically, I don't know if you are aware or if you're informed about it, that Lebanese-Armenians arriving to Armenia along with the Syrian Armenians in the last 8 years or so gives a perfect opportunity to push forward for the development of teaching of Western Armenian at schools. Does the Office of High Commissioner have any plans on this, or are there any open or sort of behind the scene discussions about this? Because this is a major issue for most Armenians who return to Armenia.
It's a conversation, in fact, we have often, and in fact we had today with the Minister of Education. Look, can I just back up, Asbed, and talk generally about repatriation, please, and then specifically about this, because I think it's one big package, it's one big context. There's a question here saying, is the Republic of Armenia, taking any serious steps in terms of repatriation? Before the Lebanon crisis, our office was created about a year and a few months ago. And in terms of the actual philosophy, strategy on repatriation, we've been working on that for a year and some months. The idea of repatriation has to be also put in the context of what it is that we also inherited, right? So it's overly complicated to repatriate to Armenia. So when the Office of the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs was created, we inherited a type of system that creates a lot of roadblocks rather than having it be the opposite, a very inviting, open system for repatriation. Everything from why does it take 6 months, for example, to get a citizenship for the Republic of Armenia, when really it should take 1 month, 2 months, 3 months? Why is it so difficult to bring your car and your right. things with these multi-layer of customs paperwork? And this is just 2 examples. So what our office has been doing has been trying to clear the field of these hurdles, first of all. And second of all, try to open 2 windows for repatriation that are actually structural repatriation windows. One is the creation of an integration center. So we're very happy that in our 2020 and our 2021 budget, it's already been approved that we're going to be basically opening an integration center where the repatriate has a one-stop shop of people who are able to take them through the whole process, everything from trying to, register their kids in school, trying to, find housing, healthcare, education, jobs, paperwork, all of that. So that's actually being created right now, and we're working on it. The other thing is the law on repatriation. That there is an actual committee in Parliament, and also obviously the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs is part of that, where there's going to be a law on repatriation, right? What are the rights and responsibilities for people who are about to repatriate? I say all of this in the following context. When the Lebanon crisis happened vis-a-vis the economic crisis and now the explosion, all of these wheels were already turning. What we're talking about now, so that's one conversation. What we're talking about now is more immediate aid, right? It's much more of an emergency kind of aid. So that's a very different conversation, which is, is the government of Armenia, in a position, does it have the capacity to quickly, for example, give rent subsidies to people, for example, give funding for food baskets, do very quick sort of healthcare, etc. So the reason I bring all of this back in terms of your Aref Madahayden question is because right now the conversation isn't in terms of, are we going to be able to preserve Western Armenian because we're dealing with an emergency situation? Actually, it's, are we going to be able to integrate these kids into the current educational system? And actually, it's, are we going to be able to provide a high level of education for people to learn Aref Madahayden? Now, maybe a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's the reality of the conversation we're having. Obviously, the more long-term conversation is, what are we going to do within the state structures, within the academia as it is, to preserve Western Armenian? And why, my sister's kids, when they go to Armenian school, they get to click the box in terms of which Armenian they want to study, and why wouldn't we get there one day in the Republic of Armenia? Sorry for the long-winded response.
No. Contextualizing,
I wanted to give the context.
No, absolutely, Sarah. And what you mentioned in terms of in international aid, there are so many different aid models, right? Disaster relief model, there is the Oxfam model of long-term sustainable communities, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing to be kept in mind. One thing from my personal, yes, Tsolin, I acknowledge you in 1 second. One thing to keep in mind is that you guys need to do a better job publicizing, Sarah, about these things. I think these are things that people might hear only from here and so on. You need to get the word out that at least the process is underway. And I'm guessing one final thing, it's a rhetorical question, you can just say yes or no. One question is that in this work, I'm guessing you also work with other different organizations, civil, non-governmental organizations like Aleppo NGO and the HPU and so on and so forth. Perfect.
Thank you. But thank you for saying that. I really would like to take the opportunity to say this is absolutely a public-private partnership. Everything we're doing on repatriation, emergency assistance is public-private partnership. We're having conversations. We've had conversations with Aleppo NGO, with Repat Armenia, and everybody on the ground.
Right. Tsolin?
Thanks. I had a question, 2 questions that's sort of for everyone, of course. Is maybe we can talk a little bit about issues of class, because Sara, you mentioned the people that have been coming to Armenia already have connections or even have houses. I mean, could you imagine having 2 houses? I don't know if people like in Karantina, that's completely destroyed, have that type of capital, obviously. So what about the poorest of the poor? That are not going to actually leave. And I don't want to use the word repatriation because I think that that's off. I think we can talk about emigration, but repatriation is as if they are already from Armenia and they actually have no connection to Armenia. We are creating connections, right? This is something new and novel. So maybe, what is going to happen to the poorest of the poor Armenians that have been affected through this catastrophe, that certainly don't have maybe any connections, aren't on this, obviously on this webinar, right? As well, what's the situation for them? And these are often, many of these people feel that it's only the sectarian infrastructure that's going to promote their desires, right? And they might be the strongest to say, like, wait, what do you mean she's talking about overhauling the system? This is the system that has actually gotten me A, B, and C, right? Because there's, because of issues of power and the failures of the Lebanese state. So that's also something I think we should bring up.
Yeah. No, great point, Tsolin. I was thinking about it. I didn't want to raise it, but you're absolutely right. It's about the sense of connection, repatriation in my mind. That's why I didn't use repatriation when I was talking about it. It's more, for instance, those Armenians who had left Armenia and then coming back, they would be in a different category because they have real connection. And personally speaking, yes, my family is in Karantina. Their home is destroyed and they have no whatsoever connection, physical connection to Armenia. But these are the things I think Sara is also open to these discussions and listening. This is part of the listening tour, right? Bands have the listening tour and, candidates have listening tours, but this is also about listening tour and understanding. I look at many projects in Armenia in terms of repatriation, for the lack of any other word, let's call it this, but it usually looks at professionals, people who have some means and so on. But the majority of the people from Lebanon and Syria do not fall in that category. And with an impending sort of the epidemic in Syria expanding now, that raises a whole lot of questions about, can immigration happen at a time of COVID, or how do you do that? Because can you accept people, just a rhetorical question, Sara, for you in general to keep in mind, but can you accept people who are not Armenian citizens? Because the law says that, or you only accept people who are Armenian citizens or residents who can come back to Armenia under the COVID-19 situation. But what if I'm an Armenian that doesn't have the citizenship or the residency? Can I come and get my paperwork there? So
yes,
exceptions to the law.
Yes, you can. The only reason we were saying Republic of Armenia and residents is because of COVID. Now that it had,
Right.
As of last Friday, anybody, even on a tourist visa, can come to Armenia and then start their paperwork here. I just wanted to also just quickly address that one of the meetings High Commissioner and I had today was with the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare in order to decide how are we going to serve people who come to Armenia who are not in this, in this upper echelon or even middle class Armenian. So that's absolutely a conversation we're having as well. What can we offer, people who come with nothing? So
Okay.
it's on the radar as well.
Okay. Tsolin, you disappeared. I know you had to leave and here you are again. I just want to finalize this to wrap up. Let's start with you, Tsolin, and then I'll go because you're pressed for time. Any final thoughts in terms of, just within a minute, just overall, any thoughts about what the future, or what does this overall discussion about Lebanon mean?
Sorry, 1 second.
Okay, we'll give you a second. The challenges of parenthood, I understand. I'll ask Ohaness first.
No, I can talk.
You're back.
I can talk.
You're
Yeah.
back.
It was the pacifier. It's really important.
Of course it is.
I wish we could all have one sometimes to calm us.
These days, we all need collective pacifiers, or some other people call it alcohol.
Yes, we just outgrow them and move on. But so that's a hard question anyway, right? And I am not in the place in my comfortable, situation here in the Netherlands to speak for any Lebanese, no matter, or actually anyone living in Lebanon, because of course this tragedy has really affected non-Lebanese too, like migrant workers, and very strongly as well, right? So I'm just not in the place to give, some type of platitude about like what to do about the situation. I do think that this tragedy has affected so many inside and outside of Lebanon that it could be used as a precipice for actual change. And I believe that. And I know that some people were sort of, even from the activist scene, were sort of disappointed in the first protests that they weren't even bigger, right? Post the tragedy, right?
Right.
I think that people are still reeling and they're mourning and they're trying to, you know, get glass and still out of their hair, literally. And I think that you know, that it's not a missed opportunity, because I think some people even thought that, right? That the protests were not big enough, and oh no, this is going to happen, and still nothing is going to change. I don't believe that. I think that people are too disgusted, too affected, and you know, really just disgusted with everybody. In any type of power that, and I'm very, you know, this is the only thing I can personally hope, right? That it will bring, you know, some type of change that the inhabitants of Lebanon, be they citizen or not, really deserve, right?
Right. Yeah, and add to that, also too shocked to be able to think about anything coming in the next immediate future, short term or long term.
Right.
Thank you, Tsolin. Ohaness, your final thoughts?
All right. I would return to something that I said at the beginning in my talk. The explosion exposed Lebanon's economic and political bankruptcy. And Lebanon was already bankrupt. My final thoughts are the following. Lebanon needs structural reform, transparency, corruption should be addressed, but most importantly, at the same time, Lebanon needs state building and nation building. Otherwise, the difficulties would continue. Immigration, there's always been immigration, Asbed. Nobody can stop immigration. And when there are economic difficulties and political instability, it is natural that people would immigrate. Certainly all those who are able to immigrate. There are many families who are not able. Poverty rates have increased. Unemployment, more than 500,000 Lebanese today are unemployed. 550,000 Lebanese are unemployed. This is recent statistics a week ago. So also the foreign donors and the IMF, we didn't refer to it in our talk a while ago. Lebanon is, the government of Lebanon, before submitting its resignation, has been conducting talks with the IMF in order to shore up Lebanon. But the answer was very clear from the international community. If Lebanon does not introduce structural reform, clear, transparent, there will be no financial assistance. $1 will not be paid to the Lebanese government. This is very clear. So the challenge is very big. And this goes back to what we said a while ago, just I'm wrapping up, overhauling the system, call it whatever you want. But reform, there is no escape from reform. And the Lebanese politicians and leaders, sectarian leaders, are now they face change. Now for them, reform means losing power. And this is the real challenge, whether they are willing to introduce the reform or not. Sorry. And this addresses part of what what Tsolin said, sorry, and what Antranig said and what you said a while ago. Concerning our community, the Lebanese community, we are also weakened in this country. This is not a secret. We also need overhauling. We also need transparency, accountability. We should not forget that the number of the Armenians in Lebanon, I don't know. We don't have statistics. You just said it a while ago. How we can actually hold our schools, our community institutions, our clubs, so on and so forth. This is another big challenge to the Armenian community. And leaders in the Armenian community should also think about it seriously, should give it a serious thought, sorry. Well, probably with the coordination with the Republic of Armenia, I don't know. I mean, Sara is much more involved in this,
Right.
but we
And I
cannot
will ask her
continue.
in a
Yes, we
moment.
cannot continue in the same situation as Lebanon. So we also need some sort of reform. Thank you, Asbed.
Thank you, Ohaness. You know, one of the things to keep in mind is that as we have been talking that the Armenians in Lebanon are part of the overall processes in Lebanon, so is the strategy about the Lebanese our Lebanese Armenian diaspora is part or has or shares issues and problems with the rest of the Armenian diaspora. And as much as it sounds insensitive maybe, but I mean, the issue of the Lebanese Armenians or the Syrian Armenians is not the only issue probably on the agenda of the Armenian government or the Armenian, but it is the current one and the most pressing one. So it's also about prioritization, but also looking at the larger context. Sorry, Sara, I felt that I'm speaking on your behalf in this.
No,
but any final thoughts?
That was perfect. I can just say goodbye. No, look, I mean, obviously our office was created to build bridges between Armenian diaspora, strengthening the diaspora as much as we're strengthening Armenia. You know, like I said, in the case of Lebanon, it is our job to make sure that those Lebanese Armenians who choose to move to Armenia understand that our doors are open and all the resources within our capacity are available to them, and that we would be, you know, very happy if Lebanese Armenians who were planning on leaving Lebanon make Armenia their home. You know, our office, including our NGO partners, are, you know, standing at attention to create those opportunities as well as to support. At the same time, it also behooves us, it's also our job to support our Lebanese Armenian institutions, our schools, our communities, and all of that. However, it would certainly help us if we had it a little bit more organized also from the inside in order to give us the priority so that we understand where it is that the Lebanese Armenian community would like our attention to go. So like I said, we're doing our best to be balanced and neutral in all of that as much as we can. But I guess my last message really is that you know, the Republic of Armenia's doors are open for people who want to come permanently, for people who want to come temporarily, just take a breath. Maybe some people just want to come and take a breath and go back. Right. So for all of those iterations, we're ready and we're welcoming.
Right, thank you. Yeah, the all elusive unified diaspora and community leadership. That's one of the major challenges to talk about differently. This has been wonderful, people. Thank you so very much for your participation, insight, and also the dialogue and disagreement and the dialogue. I think this is very useful to think about issues from different perspectives, not just one. I hope our audience also enjoyed being informed about this. Unfortunately, the human mind is always basically, if it's out of sight, out of mind. This is a pressing issue now, but we shouldn't forget that you know, there are different parts of the world that are facing this similar or more difficult problems. Armenians in different places have also problems. It is difficult to be an Armenian, isn't it? Or being part of a small nation where you have to think about so many different things. You know, your homeland, your host land, the country that you were born in, the country that you might repatriate to, Tsolin, or not. But I appreciate your time. Really thankful for your time, your insight, and all the best for every single one of you, to the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.